So we're here with Professor Boris Wolfson from Amherst College, and we are going to be discussing Kujawa and his Berkeley concert that occurred in 1979. So the first question we like to ask you is, in what capacity did you become acquainted with Bulat Kujawa?
So he was a family friend. He had known my family since the mid-'60s, and so I sort of remember his songs before I remember myself. And the family lore is which Kujawa song I started with, which Kujawa song I first wrote out when I first learned how to print, how many mistakes did I make in which song, how did I mispronounce a certain word. There's a whole lore because...
So what is the first, what is the conjecture, what is the first song?
So the first song... the first song that supposedly I sang was "Виноградную косточку," because apparently I sang "Виноградную косточку в теплую землю за ой," and that was the kind of the 3-year-old or 4-year-old in me. But he had met my grandparents when my dad was still a teenager, so he'd known him as a teenager. So this is already, for me, was the second generation. And I know that by age 5, that summer of 1980, for which I sent you the picture, they were living in the Crimea, and I met him on the street. This is also, I mean, this I actually remember. We were just walking with my other grandmother. I was being, I guess, taken out for a walk, the way a child usually is at that age. And he was walking, he went into town to get food for his family. He was there with his wife. And he was walking back to the trolley to take it back to the house that they were staying at. And I saw him on the street, and I said, "Здравствуйте, Bulat Shalovic." And he stopped because there's no, like, that was not an expected occurrence on the street, that a little kid, would sort of recognize him and say this to him. And so this then became the kind of family greeting. Every time we'd call, we'd say, "Здравствуйте, Bulat Shalovic," because there was this kind of the family lore that had to go with it. But it was almost entirely through songs and through his presence in the house that I knew him. And then we stayed with them we would go up to Moscow every few months, and a couple times I actually stayed with him for maybe about 10, 12 days in his apartment. So that was the connection there. And then I saw him a couple times in the States. In 91 and in 94. I think 94 was his final, 91 before he got sick, and 94 was his final tour of the United States.
Oh, wow. So the Berkeley one was really quite early then. Yeah, this late 70s. Wow.
Yeah, and I again, Olga will know all about it, but I think 79 was his first trip to the States.
I think it was. I think that's what she said.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very nice. And so your particular connection to this recording, you said something about how you brought it to Moscow for the archive.
So the recording was sitting in that wonderful file cabinet under lock, among other videotapes. And I think when I was taking Olga's contemporary literature seminar in, I imagine, 2001, maybe, we watched it. She played it in class. And I was struck by the quality of the recording, which seemed great, and by Simon's wonderful introduction, and by just sort of the way that the concert, it just felt very immediate, and it captured his performing persona very vividly. And I think it was 2001. I was going to Moscow in the summer to do some research in the archives and was going to see his family. And so when I saw them, I asked them if they were aware of this. And Olga Kujawa said she didn't know that there were any recordings of him from 79. And so when I came back in 2002 to do more time in the archives, by that time I had made a copy in Berkeley and brought it over so that his son, Bula, his youngest son, Bulat/Anton, could then digitize it. So they now have a DV copy of it that is part of the Kujawa Museum archive. But that was the...
that's really interesting.
But Olga Kujawa had no memory of this. She has vague memories of Berkeley, vague memories of Simon. It was a total revelation for her. She watched this. We watched it together. We watched the tape together, and she was just floored and thought it was also like the most wonderful testimony to how he was in public, but also there was really, he could perform authenticity in public very well because he was often so reserved in private life that it wasn't that hard to affect that same kind of reserve in public. And so it's a nice testimony to how he is.
That's great. So it is really this is how he was. This is a good representation of what his.
To me, again, that's pretty much the time from which I remember him, the late 70s, early 80s, and that certainly agreed with my childhood memory of how he was.
Oh, that's great. Do you have any questions, Kit?
I guess just one more question. We were wondering if you could kind of speak to Akujava's sort of broader importance in Russian culture of the 20th century.
Well, so I think one of the ways in which he was important to, let me start there, to kind of an average quasi-intelligentsia, not even a fully intelligentsia family, which was my family, is that he opened up a whole new way of expressing intimate emotion in the late 50s. I guess my father's, one of his earliest memories, and we're talking about 57, 58, so these are the very first years when his music, when Akujava's music began circulating. And at that point, again, it's a family story, my dad thought that Akujava was a title of the song, and so that genre, the song was called Akujava. He didn't listen because there was such a particular way in which it spoke about longing and happiness too, and certainly wartime, his favorite kind of topics of the 50s, late 50s, sounded so unofficial, so effortless, so kind of charmingly unforced, that I think it almost bought you a breathing space in what was otherwise a still fairly regulated cultural and social space. So I think that was, to me, as I grew up, still the kind of the major function, that it opened up a space to express with just a little bit of nuance in very simple melody, but with just enough irony and just enough melancholy, this sense of an intimate, maybe even overly familiar sometimes, but sort of familiar relationship to selfhood and to history too, because so much of his songs that had to deal with history were sort of refracted through this colloquialized and intimate realm. So I think that's the context in which I would put him most immediately, this reinvention of the intimate in the late 50s and the early 60s. And then ultimately this attempt to negotiate the relationship between some kind of utopian idea of what a more normal human community could be like, and the reality in which his listeners found himself.
That's great.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess we don't want to take up too much of your time with these questions. So I guess, is there anything else you would like to ask? Or?
No, I think that's good.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.